Hi, thank you everyone, and I'll start the slides. As before, we're a US listed company on the New York Stock Exchange, so our lawyers advise us to put all that in. If you read it carefully, basically says, anyway, all of it says what I say may not be true. The team at Volition is a team of dedicated individuals with a shared goal to save lives by revolutionising the way disease, and especially cancer, is diagnosed throughout the world through routine blood tests. A few key financials. It's a financial meeting. I'll get onto the science and the market a bit later. We're listed on the New York Stock Exchange. We IPO'd in 2015. It's actually kind of cool. We got on the platform and everything. Our market cap is around 70 million at the moment. Cash on hand, it's always a very important thing to keep in mind. At June 30, we had just under 12 million, and we did a raise with a large existing investor. So we had just over 20 million. We also have a lot of outstanding warrants, which are coming up now, just a little above where we are, which would add another $18 million to our balance sheet if they're exercised, and we burn a little over $1 million a month. And like my Australian colleague, we've got a lot of government money. Cancer is a dire disease that is diagnosed exceptionally badly, and currently, which we aim to help fix. We've got about $4 or $5 million from the Walloon region in Belgium, where our lab is, and some other government projects. And the clinical trials we run are very, very low cost, given our tests, the nature of our tests. We only need a small amount of blood, and the groups we work with are world-renowned institutions who are desperate to have a blood test for several types of cancer. The investment highlights, I discussed some of those. We have a range of easy-to-use blood tests in development. We believe a simple, easy-to-use blood test is absolutely the only way of dealing with compliance, meaning getting people to actually do a cancer test. It's actually quite horrifying. Most of the cancer diagnostics out there bare minimum of 30 to 40% of people refuse to do them. In colorectal cancer, that's because they don't want a colonoscopy or touch their own feces. Breast cancer, mammographies, lung scans, they all have horrible compliance. And it doesn't matter how good the test is, if you don't take it, the accuracy is extremely easy to work out. It's exactly zero. And if you do get cancer, you'll have a couple of very bad years. You cost the healthcare system a fortune. And if you had been diagnosed early, for most cancers, you're in very good shape. So early diagnosis is absolutely the only way of dealing with cancer we currently know. And the only way of getting compliance high, 80 to 90%, is through a easy-to-use blood test. Because why? Because it takes the option of not doing the test out of your hands. If you're sitting in the doctor's chair and you give blood, you don't really go through the list and knock things off you don't like cholesterol tests and things. You just have the blood tests as the way they are. Its technology is very unique, extremely well patented, and we have extremely large trials in process now, and we aim to commercialize in the next year or two. What we're doing is very unique, so we have a huge patent portfolio, mostly granted, and a lot more we're applying for now. And we've shown our tests work in a range of cancers in smaller trials. We're now running large trials. So product highlights, the actual products we do. We expect to be launching the colorectal products in Europe next year, in the US probably 2021, more than 2020. We have a lot of data coming out on how well our products work in colorectal trials this year and next. We also have a cancer study underway with the University of Bonn in Germany with the 27 most prevalent cancers to see the broad range of how our tests work in different types of cancers. We've shown very good results in 4 different cancers now, and we'll know how the different tests work in different cancers. We've just released some extremely exciting prostate results, which answer the most important question of all. In prostate cancer, it's not do you have the cancer, but is it one that's going to kill you, or is it one which it doesn't need treatment? And I'll get onto that later. And we've also got a range of other studies going, including a large one in endometriosis with the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford. Again, another worldwide institute that we're working with to help collect the trials for us so that we can run our tests on them. I guess I won't spend too much on this slide. It's kind of obvious. Cancer is an incredibly deadly disease, kills in 1 in 7 of us, and it's getting more and more prevalent, mostly because the prime risk factor for every cancer out there is the same thing, age, and we're all getting older, and our population's getting older. Problem is the healthcare budgets are growing, but nowhere near fast enough to take into account all the new things and fancy techniques that we have to save lives. Our test is something which will save money from the healthcare system for reasons which I'll get to. The 5 most prevalent cancers here in the United Kingdom and in the US. If you notice, the ones which are badly diagnosed, the deaths quite closely match the diagnosis. All very bad and getting worse because we are, as a species in the developed countries, getting older and older. So currently people have a general perception that cancer is diagnosed through a blood test. Absolutely it is not. The only one that's commonly diagnosed through a blood test is, or authorized to be, and it's not great at diagnosing it, is the PSA for prostate. Everything else, in the vast majority of cases, is done through ultimately what comes down to looking at the cancer, which is not the best way of doing it. If you think of a lung scan for lung cancer, colonoscopy, all the other scans, biopsies, you take a bit of the cancer out and have a look at the histology, fecal tests, which are actually not looking at it, but that's just looking for blood in your stool, and a pap smear. So all the other diseases commonly on the left-hand side are diagnosed through blood tests for the very simple reason it's very easy to do and you can do a lot of things at the same time, and people actually do blood tests. But cancer isn't, because nothing's ever been found which works well enough to get it done, despite all the groups looking at it. So we really aim to revolutionise the way cancer is diagnosed. What we have is a very powerful step change in the marker we use, and what the method we use is a very low cost, very easy to run test on existing platforms. What we're looking for is very unique, the nucleosome structure, which I'll outline, but the method of detection is extremely common in every lab in the world, which will make our test very widely adopted if we successfully launch, and extremely profitable for shareholders, which is also important for shareholders. And the bottom one there is actually very, very important. It's not often discussed. A lot of blood tests in development. We're the only groups looking for the projects, the assays we are, and we're also the only group really looking for a low-cost, easy-to-use test. But a small quantity of blood is also exceptionally important. You only usually give 1 or 2 vials of blood typically. If it takes 3 or 4 vials of blood to run your test, it's not going to be a routine test. It's not something you're going to do at the doctor's office routinely. And as I said before, it's horrifying, but given a lot of people the opportunity to duck out of a test, they will. So if you've got to go for a separate blood draw for an expensive test, compliance plummets, which means if you're not doing it, it isn't working. So what's our technology? Why is it different? Why have we managed to get so many patents? If you're maybe familiar with some of this, the chromosome, if you unravel it, there's about 5 foot of it, and it's tiny until it's unraveled. Every 150 base pairs, there's one of these. It's called a nucleosome. What everyone else looks for, a lot of other groups look for now, is the DNA itself, which I'll get to why that's different to us and why we believe ours is far better. These are very complicated switching mechanisms. They control what can be read from your DNA. There's about 1,000 different structures on the nucleosomes in your body, and as it controls what can be read from the DNA, and it signals basically what happens. So these are known to be very different in cancer, the different structures. There are lots of them. There's about 20 million in every chromosome. And they get into the blood when the cell dies, including cancer cells. The body cuts up the chromatin into nucleosome-sized chunks to be reprocessed. You're probably all familiar. Cancer is a very dynamic disease, a lot of births and deaths of cells going on. So the end product is a ton of these in the blood of cancer patients. They're not harmful, it's not poisonous, it's not a metastasis or anything, they're just there. Now, the secret sauce is not just there are more of them, but the structures, which are the signaling switches which have gone wrong, are easily measured through a very simple platform, which is what we use. So you're probably familiar, those of you who have any knowledge in this field, there's a lot of companies looking for blood tests. No one looks for nucleosomes except us, and because there is quite a group mentality, a herd, if you will. Circulating cell-free DNA is the DNA itself. Extremely important in a lot of things. The problem is there's only one change in the whole chromosome which they're after, and well, one by one they look for them. So you're looking for the proverbial needle in the haystack. And typically, to find anything in their method, you have to find a range of them in your blood, not just one. Where our changes are genome-wide, which means they're on a very large number of the nucleosomes. The switching is not measured. They're also very large structures. What we're after, these are 8 proteins put together. So they're very common, different structure, and a large protein structure, which we can easily measure. So companies developing the circulating cell-free DNA work include Grail. Probably haven't heard of it, but they raised over $1 billion in the seed round. It's reasonably impressive. They need that much money. They're actually raising more now. It's because it's a very complicated, expensive thing to do. Looking for DNA in your blood, it's a very rare event, and sequencing is not cheap. It's getting cheaper, but it's still always going to be more expensive. And all the other methods I've discussed and out there need a ton of blood, because you're looking for very rare events in the blood. It means the more blood you have, the more likely you are to find it. And the signals thereafter are much more common in late-stage cancer than early-stage cancer, where ours actually the best results we have actually are in the early-stage cancers, which is where you really want to be found. It's not very clever anymore to find late-stage cancers. A lot of things out there discover late-stage cancer. What everyone has big problems doing is early-stage, which we've shown excellent results in. So our product strategy, I won't go through this too much, but given our platform is ELISA are what most blood tests are. The platform we use, it's a microtiter plate with antibodies. It's very, very simple. You can then adapt your test to be a lot of different things. It can be a frontline screening test, which is the very first test you have to see if you need to go to the next screening level. It can be used with other screening modalities, like fecal testing or low-dose CT scans. And it can also be used in disease monitoring. Size of the markets, frontline screening tests is absolutely massive. If you think it's, typically you only screen people over 50 years old, just because that's when it becomes common enough to, cancers tend to be, not always, but tend to be quite rare in younger people and quite common in older people. So you screen older people. Health economics rules the day. So that is basically every human being between 50 and 74 who can, 70 to 75, 74 in most countries, who can actually afford the screening test. And then all these tend to be a fraction of that, but it's massive. Anyone who cracks a blood test as a frontline test will make a huge amount of money. Order of magnitude, the PSA, those men here who are lucky enough to be of that age group who've gone through digital exam and biopsies, it's a multi-billion-dollar business by itself. It's a test that doesn't work very well, and it's out of patent. Other tests, there are fecal tests out there just in the colorectal space. What a fecal test does is just look for blood in your stool and perhaps analyze the blood. There's a company in the US called Exact Sciences, now worth $9 billion with a B, with a souped-up fit test, looking for blood in your stool, because it's such a massive market, and so it's a huge, huge, huge market. Intellectual property, we are very unique in what we do. We've been doing this for 9 years now. We have absolutely dominated the space of circulating nucleosomes. So we have a huge number of patents, as I discussed, and it's quite a large portfolio. I think if you look at all the other technologies currently in development, things like circulating cell-free DNA, there are dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of groups doing it, which means the IP portfolios for all the companies is going to be more of a spaghetti than anything really you could actually use as individual ones. So if nucleosomes become what we believe they are becoming, which is a very important part of medicine in a whole lot of areas, we will absolutely dominate the space. And if you equate it to circulating cell-free DNA, we have all the patents to block anybody else and do what we do in a space that we think is going to be as important as DNA itself. So again, huge number of deaths worldwide from cancer. What I discussed before, I believe the only way of getting to, and this is, I think, a truism, the only way of getting to a very high participation rate, meaning people actually do the test, is a very low cost, easy to use blood test. And the numbers, if its current screening modalities are taken up to that, just are huge, hundreds of thousands of lives saved a year. And if you save hundreds of thousands of lives at a low cost, the actual cost of making our test is only a few dollars. It's about $1 per assay. We put 4 or 5 together. We sell them, we will aim to sell them. We haven't been selling products now for about $100 in the US and about $50 here. We aimed it to, there's a lot of pressure in a biotech company, I mean a healthcare startup, is to try to charge $500 or $1,000 a test. That's not what we're about. I don't think it's right. Number one, I don't think it's the way to make the most money. I think the way to make an absolute fortune is pitch it very affordably, save the healthcare system a ton of money, and then you'll be giving it to pretty much every adult of that age group, which makes you a very, very, very profitable company. And we aim to keep the company very virtual. There's no need to make the tests ourselves. There's no need to market them. There are huge companies that run ELISAs worldwide, Abbott, Roche, Siemens. You can make manual plates, which is what we're doing now, so they can be run in any lab in the world. So it's a business model which is quite different. Most healthcare companies really try and jam the price up as high as possible and go for a market which is I don't think that's the best thing to do at all. So this is kind of obvious what I've discussed. Why is a blood test better? It's very easy to use. There's no risk to the patient. Things like colonoscopy can actually lead to a perforation of the bowel, which is something I'm sure you don't want. It's very convenient. A blood test happens while in the doctor's office. The cost for our test is low. Other tests in development are by definition high because of the reasons I said. And compliance for a routine blood test is anyone who has a blood test, which is actually not quite everybody. There are actually a few people who refuse to take blood tests, but it's rare. All this doesn't matter if your test doesn't work. We've shown very good early stage detection, not only of early stage cancers in colorectal, but also for high risk adenoma. We've also showed excellent results in a range of other cancers in smaller trials. Now, these don't make you a billion-dollar company. Small trials show that it is a proof of concept. What you need to do then is to run very large trials with assays which can be run as products. But as you can see, those are incredibly impressive results. So how do you do that? You either spend an absolute fortune in massive trials, or you work with the best organizations in the world who collect for you because they have their own reasons for wanting to save lives, usually government programs. For example, the Early Detection Research Network in the US are collecting blood so people can run tests on their samples. That trial in the US is 13,500 patients' samples. If we were to do that ourselves, it's about $3,000 or $4,000 a person. Multiply that by 13,500, it's pretty similar to our market cap. We're paying $3 million because they really want us to work, and the same as it goes all the way down. The National Taiwan University, that's costing us a couple of $1 million. Again, they're desperate for a blood test for colorectal cancer. The Germans, Dr. Holdenrieder, who's a very legend in this space, have massive trials going as well for us to show how it works. If any of these trials are successful, the market caps we discussed for the companies that have tests which are, I think, far inferior, a fecal test or another blood test like are developed, have companies which have $8 to $9 billion market caps, and we're at 70 million right now. So what's the launch timeline? We aim to have these trials finished over the next 12 months, starting with the European launches for products in the colorectal space, and then through Asia and the US. The US is always last because the FDA is a big project, but that market is also incredibly lucrative, as there's about 90 million Americans of screening age in colorectal cancer, and about 30 million of them are non-compliant right now, despite all the billions and billions spent on colonoscopies. I'll go through the space if anyone has any particular questions. We have a very solid regulatory strategy throughout the three main regions of the world, and massive trials underway in all three regions. We're also getting some early revenue. The ability to detect the markers we're after in the blood is also useful in a range of other research. The nucleosomes are very important in a range of other areas. We just started selling research kits. We have the first one on the market now, and we aim to add every single one of the target structures we're after on the research market as well. Not huge revenue early on, but what you do is if you give them sell them for about $500 to $1,000 per kit of 96 wells. But if that research organization then needs, or the company typically needs that for a product, they've got to come back to you. And that's a whole different discussion of what it's worth if it's really helped a drug development program or another process. And it also helps our IP get out there or get published, because we're not very well known at the moment, being a small company. So as I said, the launch of the European products, the launch of the US products, will have a lot of data in the next 12 months in the colorectal, in the 27 cancer. We're aiming to run large prostate trials after our very impressive results we've just announced, and the research kits, as well as results from the endometriosis trial. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with endometriosis, but it's as a bigger market potentially as any cancer. I can go through what that is later, but I don't have 2 minutes left, so if anyone has any questions, I can discuss that afterwards. My favourite subject. The corporate, I've discussed all of that. We have the intellectual property. We now have the team worldwide. We have a team of over 45 different people. Our burn rate is very low. Our balance sheet is very strong. We keep it very low cost. The markets are huge. If we crack it, we will be an immensely successful company in the next couple of years. We have it all in place, the large trials in place. The assays are just finishing off the final development work. We have been slower than we thought. It's now 8.5 years. We all thought when we started the company it'd be 5 years and we'd be finished, but it takes a long time. Cancer's a tricky beast, but it takes a long time to develop it from the results where we had good results in small trials to large trials. most notably making sure the tests themselves are very robust. They can be shipped worldwide. They can be run in any lab. It's a lot of work, but we've gone a long, long way through that work now. The team, everyone says the team's important, but it absolutely is. We have an absolutely fantastic team of dedicated people who really are trying to make a difference. Dr. McAuliffe, on the third one down, worked for the World Health Organization for most of his career, developing blood tests for them. Now he does it for us in this field. He's done an amazing job. Also, we have the top gentleman is doing our projects in the US and has organized these large trials for us in the US. Dr. Quay in the middle has been getting the trials for us in Asia and helping us with the product launches there. She's organized the trials with the National Taiwan University. Again, an amazing institution working very closely with us. And this is probably worth showing as well. This is how we do things. This is our facility that's been open since March of last year. The volume of work we've been managed to do has gone up exponentially. We have just over 30 people working in that facility. What we're about is trying to do things as low cost as possible to make the best impact we can with the lowest funding we can. This facility cost us 1.2 million euros to buy. We spent about 600,000 on it, which was and very strongly supported by the region in Belgium. It's 20,000 square foot. If that was in Cambridge in England or in the US, it would cost us about that per year. So we're all about getting the biggest bang for our buck to make sure we can really get the products on the market as quickly as possible, save a ton of lives and suffering, and if we do all of that, we'll become an incredibly valuable company. And as I said, companies which have launched just one product, which I think would be far inferior to what we have, are in the $9 billion range in the US 2 or 3 years after launching. So it's all ahead of us. The team's hard at work. Probably not now, it's Belgium, they're closed now. But they're hard at work trying to finish off these tests, to finish off these trials so we can launch product and make a very big difference. That's Volition. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Cameron. And again, is there any questions? Peter, I think gentleman at the back there. Peter, thank you.
Thanks for that.
Anytime.
I've got a bit of anxiety about your product. You're probably aware that screening tests have the potential to cause more harm than good if they're not right.
Absolutely.
So tell me a bit more about the test if you're using it as a frontline screening test for cancer. You take some blood, the test result comes back and it's haystack positive. That tells you might have cancer somewhere. How does it give you any more discriminating or localizing information?
So a couple of things, yes. So basically a test that tells you have a cancer is not going to be useful because the number of tests you have to have would probably just scare the hell out of you and cost the healthcare system a fortune. So what we're doing is developing tests for specific cancers, starting with colorectal, prostate, lung and pancreatic. Any test that's non-invasive is not going to be the final endpoint. For example, in colorectal, you then have to have a colonoscopy. So, and that will tell you where it is, if you have it, number one, and where it is, and remove it. A colonoscopy, for example, in colorectal cancer is also the treatment that you have. The only other option is, in the Americans tried, given the healthcare system is so incredibly rich or wasteful, depending on how you look at it, they give every single person, they try to screen everyone initially with a colonoscopy, which is ruinously expensive for the system. They run about $3,000 or $4,000 in the US per colonoscopy, times by 90 million of people of screening age. Pretty quickly you get system which is unsustainable. So what our tests do as a blood test is they direct you, they don't tell you have cancer, they say you're high risk of having the cancer and need to have a follow-up test. So it's a way of triaging those from the general population to the people who need the next level for following up. And in prostate cancer, we'd actually save a ton of money, and that's exactly the problem you mentioned with the PSA with prostate. It tells you you have cancer, but not, is it something you should worry about or something which...
It tells you might.
Sorry?
It tells you might.
Well, often it does tell you have cancer, but that's actually not an important question in prostate. What's important in prostate is it an aggressive cancer or not aggressive? If it's not aggressive, prostate's an unusual cancer in that they actually often leave it in you. You don't leave a lung cancer in you for 10 seconds if you don't need to. But prostate cancer, the operation can leave men impotent, incontinent, two things probably most guys here don't want to be. So there's a lot of overdiagnosis and there's an awful lot of unnecessary biopsies. So what our results showed in the prostate test, again, it needs to be confirmed in large trials, but with a very high degree of accuracy, we could tell aggressive cancer from all other things.
Because the nucleosomes are different for different cancers and different for aggressive prostate cancers.
So we know from the trials we have, they're different from aggressive from others. There are some commonalities where there's over 1,000 structures on the nucleosome, so there are some which appear to be similar between different cancers. I'm not a scientist, they can go through those with you. So what we're looking for is finding panels which are different in different cancers. Now, what we've done is trials in different cancers, which have showed they're very accurate. Why we're doing the 27 different cancer studies is not for one test for 27 cancers, but to show what the pattern is for different cancers.
Okay,
Any other questions, please? We have time for one more. Gentleman here, please.
So I was most interested in the colorectal cancer case because that seemed to be the most advanced.
Yes.
And I wondered about your kind of timeline from bringing a product to the market to actually having it used in a screening program, given that in Europe, screening programs are organised as national programs where any change in the test or the way the program functions has to be approved by some kind of national body. That next decision requires an awful lot of evidence, and have you kind of planned for that?
Yeah, we've actually done a lot of planning because each country is actually quite different. You have a CE mark allows you to sell in every country. It doesn't mean they're going to buy for the reasons that you just mentioned. Actually, there's only about 8 countries in Europe. They're all supposed to have them. Have organised screening programs which are not just opportunistic. So those are the simplest but the hardest because there's a timeline for the national organisation. There's also a ton of countries which don't actually have properly organised screening programs nationally. So our aim is to launch in the ones which have them as starting off with a non-compliant market. Ultimately, the problem with colorectal screening is not the accuracy of the tests. Fecal testing is kind of okay. Colonoscopy is excellent. It's just a ton of people don't do that. So the lowest hanging fruit is the 30, 40, 50, up to 90% of people in countries who aren't currently screened because they just don't want to do a fecal test. They probably should, but there's a real reluctance to do a poop and scoop for a whole lot of reasons. I'm sure some people of that generation here who are over 50 haven't done their test. They can tell you why they don't do it, but there's a huge number of people who don't. So the lowest hanging fruit is a non-compliant market. Getting into the national screening programs that are currently there, it takes time, absolutely, but you're talking a couple of years. We've also done a lot of work in Asia, where it tends to be much more user-pay. So that's something we've done a lot of work on. But typically from launching to taking over a national screening program, it does take years. And in Asia, less time because it's more opportunistic. In the States, we won't really be getting big revenue into 2022. But having said all that, once you're in, and it's very hard to get out as well. The same thing applies the other way. But the actual numbers we don't put revenue projections because it gets absolutely crazy. Even if we convince 1 or 2 European countries to use us as a national screening program, we're wildly profitable on our burn rate. If we get several and Asian countries in the US, we'd be one of the biggest companies on this planet. So you don't have to have 10 different cancers in 100 countries to be profitable when your burn rate's $1 million a month, and it's not going to go much above that. So, but you have to do things right. Also, they have these processes not just because they're bureaucrats. It's very important. You want to make sure you're doing good things, not harming people. So there's a level of evidence they require, which is why we're doing massive trials. There's no company in the world attempting to do the size of trials we're doing in the continents we're doing for any of the cancers in the same way we are. So that evidence is what we're going for because it's extremely important.
Okay. Thank you. Cameron, are you joining us for a drink afterwards?
I am.
I think there's probably a few more questions, but I'm afraid we're out of time for now. So thank you very much indeed, Cameron.
VolitionRx, thank you.